Hi, I'm Ronnie Meek, and this is the Unbeliever's Bible Study, Session 22, Job. Job is often cited by those with only a passing knowledge of the Bible as their favorite book. However, upon being asked why, they usually appear to be at a loss to explain, and it becomes clear that they've likely not actually read their favorite book. Perhaps it's their favorite because it's the easiest to spell. 2 points to address before we actually get into looking at the book. First, is Job the oldest book in the Bible? The Bible is not in chronological order, except for the fact that Revelation is considered to be the book that was written last. And, Genesis obviously starts at the beginning, but it wasn't necessarily the first book written. There are textual reasons of interest to scholars that attest to Job being the oldest book. But for me, the most convincing argument concerns what is not mentioned in Job. There's no mention of the law of Moses, nor of anything concerning the nation of Israel. It is the only book in the Old Testament for which we do not have a dated context, which does not address either of these matters so prominent in most of the other books. And secondly, is Job an historical figure, or is this a parable? If you've been following this series, then you know that I do not consider this to be an important question. Parables are not synonymous with falsehood. In fact, parables specifically are stories created to teach truth. Jesus taught by telling parables, and he said he only did what he sees his Father do. Therefore, it's reasonable to assume that the Father might also teach with parables. I think it's more likely that Job is a parable because of the parable-like flow of the story, but I have no problem with those who consider Job to be historical, and he may very well be. The story itself, Job was from the land of Uz. No one knows exactly where Uz was. However, the word itself means counsel or advice, and there's certainly plenty of that in this book. He was an upright man who had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He was wealthy, having 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys and a large number of servants. The Bible says he was the greatest man of the people of the East. The scene then shifts to heaven, where the angels are in attendance before God. Among those in attendance is a fallen angel called Satan, which means accuser. And God asks Satan where he's been, and he replies, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. God points to Job as an example of a blameless and upright man. Satan claims, the only reason Job is blameless and upright is because he's been so greatly blessed. God basically says, you're on. Everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself, do not lay a finger. And so then disaster strikes. All of Job's wealth is stolen, are destroyed, and all of his children are killed. Job is understandably distressed, but he does not blame God. Instead, he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. The scene then shifts back to heaven. Satan is again present, and God points out that he was wrong about why Job was upright. And Satan replies, skin for skin. Now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. So God gives Satan permission to strike Job's health, only he cannot kill him. And Job is afflicted with painful sores from head to toe. His wife even urges him to curse God and die, but Job calls her a foolish woman and says, shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Well, we do not see anything again from Satan, but there's a new chapter that happens now with the arrival of Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, also known as Job's comforters. The comforters do a great job for 7 days, because they don't say a word. See, the best comforters often say the least. When people need comfort, they don't necessarily need platitudes. They need our presence. Once they start talking, their job, which is to comfort this man, goes downhill quickly. We have a natural human desire to explain things. When we're just talking about things, such as appliances and thunder and natural phenomenon, the results can be positive. But when we examine the real questions concerning life, death, prosperity, disaster, and meaning, why did such and such a thing happen, we almost always end up in the ditch. I won't go into all the explanations offered for why these things had happened to Job, but suffice it to say that while they seem to make a lot of sense, none of these were anywhere close to the real reason. None of these included the notion that Job was the subject of a cosmic argument between God and Satan. Perhaps the most important takeaway from the story of Job is that we really know almost nothing about anything of real importance. A lot of things in the speeches of Job and his comforters sound reasonable and even wise, but it all actually misses the mark. Job comes the closest to pure truth when he says, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and in the end he will stand on the earth." As our ignorance is borne out by the dialogue with Job and his comforters, it is brought into laser focus by the arrival of God on the scene. In chapter 38, the Lord appears out of the storm and speaks, and he pretty much sums things up with his first statement. In fact, I think he probably sums up the book of Job with his first statement. "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge?" All of our human speculation and conclusions, based on our wisdom and our discoveries, tend only to obscure God's true plans. The Lord invites Job, then, and us, to answer questions that we simply cannot answer because they go beyond the scope of science. They go beyond the scope of human understanding, human experience. These are questions that perhaps we asked as children, but not finding answers, we abandon them as adults. As children, I think we probably understood these are the real questions. For those who believe that meaning can only be found in the dictionary and that ultimately life is meaningless, the only reasonable conclusion about how to live life is to pursue hedonism. It really doesn't matter if it makes you feel good to help people or to hurt them. What really matters is how you feel. And yet something inside of us says that can't be right. That's wrong. Job ultimately resolves that meaning isn't found in human reason or in human exploration of the natural world. Meaning can only really be found in God. From ages past, most of humanity has accepted this as instinctive truth. However, as mankind has progressed in its knowledge, it is also determined that God perhaps isn't needed after all, thus drifting farther and farther away from the real answer for which the soul yearns. The Bible says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And I used to quote that wrong. I used to think that it said the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, which is something different, important, but something different. But it doesn't. It says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, real knowledge. Here is Job's conclusion. "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, 'Who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge?' Surely I spoke of things I did not understand. things too wonderful for me to know. And so while there are other minor takeaways, I would say, from the book of Job, I think the really important one is that there is in fact knowledge too wonderful for me to know, too wonderful for us to know. And I personally find great comfort and encouragement and hope in that understanding. Next time, we're going to look at the most unusual book in the Bible, the book of Psalms. I hope that you will join me.